The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com's weekly sale. Head on over to StarCityGames.com/sale because now until Sunday, September 26th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, you can save 15% off on every single Magic the Gathering Secret Lair single. That's right, 15% off every Secret Lair single. If you missed out on the drop the first time, this is your chance to catch up and save an extra 15% off. If you need to get some sweet variant frames and alternate cards for your cube, commander deck, or maybe even your modern deck, head on over to StarCityGames.com/sale, and this offer is only good until Sunday, September 26th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. 15% off of Secret Lair singles.
Hello there from Dominario's Judgment, a weekly podcast for Star City Games with me, Dom Harvey.
And me, Ari Lex.
Where we bring you the latest, greatest, and downright weirdest things Modern has to offer.
Want to know what to expect for next weekend's events? We've got you covered.
Do you want deep breakdowns of the hot topics and decks in Modern? We've got you covered.
Just want to make sure you don't miss the latest nonsense before your opponents teach you a lesson about it in the queues? Oh yeah, we have definitely got you covered.
And when Modern Horizons 2 blows the ceiling off this format, as it surely will, we'll be here with you to pick up the pieces.
Find us every week on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Or if you want to head over to StarCityGames.com, we'll be right there alongside all the great content from all your other favorite content producers.
The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop. And if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves. Welcome back, one and all, to the 540 as we continue our journey into the Midnight Hunt. Is it into the Midnight Hunt? Can you go into a hunt further than you already are in?
Yeah.
Is that...
I mean,
Yeah.
You could say that you're hunting or you're not, but that's a pretty pedestrian surface level analysis. There's clearly a deeper state of hunting.
Maybe that is what it is. Maybe you deepen your Midnight Hunt.
I mean, generally hunting, there are lazier ways to do it. You could just sit in a box and wait for the game to come to you. But I imagine a really serious hunter traversing some outlands. You know, if you're a few miles in backpacking, you are deep in a hunt, my friend.
There you go. Perfect. Deep into our Midnight Hunt Cube review, part 2. And of course, I'm Justin Parnell. You can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter. And my co-host, who has had some hands-on time with some of these Midnight Hunt cards.
I'm Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. And for 6 hours today, you could have found me cracking booster packs and sorting cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt at Lodestone Coffee and Games.
So you were literally deep into the Midnight Hunt today, then.
Indeed, yeah. And I got 2 pieces of feedback about the aesthetics of this set. Well, I have more than that, but as it pertains to opening boosters today, they've been doing more and more of these alternate card frames. I like the look of the frame in this one well enough, but it doesn't resonate with me, I have to say. It's very similar to the Fairy Tale frame from Throne of Eldraine, at least to my eyes. And that one is resonant because it's a land of fairy tales. And this one, it doesn't really mean anything to me. So I'm not generally very interested in that. But we have already praised the alternate basic lands for Innistrad Midnight Hunt on this podcast. And seeing them in person, they are even more incredible than I had thought looking at them on a screen.
I can second that. I have... the last week, literally from the last time, if you're listening to this back to back with last week's episode, basically directly after that, I left for Indianapolis to attend Gen Con, and I got back to my house a mere 1.5 hours ago from that same event. So I have not had a whole lot of time with these cards. However, there were some pre-releases that went on at Gen Con, and some customers came up to show me the basic lands at the sales booth, and the foils, I was completely blown away. They look absolutely incredible, and the non-foils look spectacular 80% of the time.
The 20% exception being basic planes, the perennial worst of the cycle.
Yeah, that's a we are who they are who we thought they were situation. We did call previously on the podcast that the planes was just going to be there, and seeing it in person did not change my opinion. The planes sadly got left out. It looks a lot better on the foil than the non-foil, but it just looks like a regular old card on the non-foil. However, the other 4 just look absolutely awesome.
There's been some chatter on Twitter about the way these basics look on the digital platforms, and a number of people are complaining that they can't tell them apart, but they always show a picture of one of the good ones next to a plains, and I'll just give you this free trick. You will never be fooled again. The one that looks like nothing is the plains. So if you can't tell what it is right away, it's a plains. The other ones are all pretty easy to identify by comparison.
Also, I think a good note is, did you forget that you put plains in your deck?
Right.
So I can't remember. I'm playing a 5-color deck with all basic lands and I can't tell them apart. I don't think that's a reasonable excuse.
I was birding a Moto draft, and the opponent controlled a forest, island, and a plain, so they had Bant mana. And with the dark color scheme, I could see it not being obvious that the opponent didn't have access to black mana. Maybe there's something to that. But if you're actually looking at what they have untapped, it's not actually any different from any other spread of basic lands.
Yeah. I they do such a good job with like the bold border around it. And let's be honest, they have like Mirage basics on Arena that you can have in your deck. If I took the average Magic player and plucked out the art from Mirage basics, they would not get 5 out of 5 of what the land type was if I just showed them the picture. So I really don't want to hear it. Okay, look, you can turn off Auto Tapper if you want. If you're really that snooty about it, that's on you. If not, then you need to accept whatever the Arena Auto Tapper is going to give you, whether you know what your lands do or not. So, sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, despite being curmudgeonly old men, this is a new thing that we agree that we 80% like.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, they're awesome. Now, in regular Limited Run, you have played some of that.
Yeah, they got me drafting again. I gotta say, I mean, it's not really the same. Maybe if I get a bunch more drafts in, I've only done 5 or 6 to this point. And I haven't found the complexity I necessarily liked about original Innistrad, but the packs are really deep. The mechanics in the set are really cool. And I just want to play with the cards. I like a lot of what's going on in the draft format, and it has its issues if you keep up on Limited at all. I think it's pretty clear at this point that blue-black is just kind of where you want to be, but it doesn't mean you can't have success with other stuff. And honestly, usually when it comes to booster draft these days, at least for me personally, the event is live longer than I'm interested in firing it up. So I've gotten in more drafts than anything since Zendikar Rising, and there was a pretty big gap before that. So as far as getting a lapsed drafter who really appreciated original Innistrad in, this set has got me in further than Shadows over Innistrad ever did.
Yeah, that's really the thing that, that's the sign of a limited format. If you're like, oh, I did this, I had the experience and I want to repeat the experience. Especially in the digital age when it's literally at your fingertips essentially at all times. Being able to go and draft whenever you want, willfully wanting to rather than feel like you need to do it, and then opting into that's really the key thing for any standard draft format. And, I think for the most part, Wizards have been doing a very good job of making interesting draft formats for the last several years, but it is tough to keep up with the ability to fire through them on Arena.
Yeah.
Because whether or not you like Magic Online or not, whether you like Arena or not, you're able to draft quicker on Magic Arena than any other place you can ever play with Magic cards. So it's tough for draft formats to stay relevant for as long, just because the speed at which you can have the experience just goes up significantly. So I will say, pat on the back for them for being able to keep limited formats continually fresh. Even ones, in the last couple of cycles, like Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, honestly, I was just so on. I played it a few times. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. But like looking back, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is still a lot more fun than something like Rivals over Ixalan. And I think it's just, it really says something that there has not been. I think that's the last draft format that I legitimately think was just not good. And everything else has either been good to great since then. So nice job. Nice job, Wizard's Coast.
Mm-hmm. And that's been a general consensus of opinions in my experience. And so I got to kind of hats off to them on that. And even some formats that I tried a couple times and I didn't see the appeal of, think of me what you will. I did not fall in love with Dominaria, but it is very high on a lot of other people's lists of best draft formats of all time.
It is very high on my list, personally. It is absolutely one of my favorite draft formats for sure. I've been drafting since Odyssey block, so
that's a long time.
It is a very long time. But we're here today to talk about Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards. And Ryan, you were mentioning that it seemed like blue and black and regular limited was the place to be. Well, last week we talked about blue cards, and they actually came out pretty well.
Yeah.
Had a lot of a classically powerful blue cards and a huge amount of blue cards that we put into our custom category. And as a reminder what those two things are, when we're reviewing cards, we put them into either classic or custom as a designation. And classic generally means you're going to put this in pretty much any cube that you're able to fit it into because it is going to be excellent very, very often. These are more standardly constructed cubes as opposed to custom, which could be a more unique draft environment. Maybe it's rarity restricted, maybe it is power level restricted, maybe it's specifically multiplayer, maybe you're going for a specific theme or not wanting to have a specific theme. So the custom cards are ones that are going to make it into less cubes, but still have merits for cube in general.
Yep, exactly. Not an outright declaration that one is less or more powerful, but without anything to nudge them along, typically the classically powerful cards will do more for the average draft deck.
Yeah, and a lot of times they're slightly more generic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing that, you need a lot of those cards. Ponder is a very generic card, but it's also still a very powerful card, and it makes it into, cubes from a, 360 card vintage powered cube to a peasant cube or a pauper cube.
Yeah,
so,
and on that front, consider a classically powerful card from this set. It does more for wonkier cubes. It's kind of more likely that your custom cube is going to be looking to incidentally put stuff in the graveyard, but it is just classically powerful because you would put it in any deck anyway.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. And like we said, so far, white and blue last week actually had quite a few cards that we liked. This week we're looking at black and red. And black is a color that has gotten a lot of treats in the last 6 months for cube. And red has not been too far behind. Red's gotten a handful of good stuff too. So without further ado, we're going to take our first break. And then when we come back, we're going to dive in to Innistrad Midnight Hunt, black cards for cube. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to StarCityGames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash, or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose store credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it all in a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, Make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. With the fastest turnaround time in the industry, get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygames.com/sell. Selling has never been easier.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more, before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
All right, Innistrad Midnight Hunt black cards. And we're going to start with the classically powerful cards that are going to fit into Cube. And I will be honest, Ryan and I went back and forth a little before we started the podcast, and there was only one card that we felt very strongly that fit into the classic designation, and that is the first black card I believe we saw previewed for this entire set, which is Infernal Grasp. And Infernal Grasp is an instant for 1 and a black, and it simply says, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. This one's pretty simple to evaluate. This is a terminate for colorless and a black. No restrictions on the creature. It's an instant. You do lose 2 life, but power comes at a cost, and this is one of the most powerful creature kill spells that we have seen for Cube in a really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit in our discussion for Adventures of the Forgotten Realms about power word kill. Mm-hmm. That one's certainly making a lot of cubes. But in the classically powerful cubes, you do run afoul of a number of dragons. Angels, demons are about in smaller numbers. Hell Rider is a devil. That's always the one that comes up as a pretty big miss for power word kill. And you wouldn't love to take 2 damage or lose 2 life to Infernal Grasp a Hell Rider, but it's better than not be able to do anything about it. And just the flexibility here is a pretty serious upgrade. And, you won't necessarily have 2 life to give, but the alternative for some of these other black conditional removal spells is sometimes they just don't work. So that cost is going to catch up with you too in a bigger way than 2 life does.
Yeah. I like this card too because it is a very powerful card that is extremely tilted towards aggressive decks, which again, Ryan and I are always both big fans of. And this plays on both sides. As an aggressive deck, losing 2 life is, more or less irrelevant. And for non-aggressive decks, there is a real cost to losing 2 life if you're killing an aggressive creature, which further helps the aggressive decks along. So this is really an all-around win in my book.
A lot of tension in an aggressive mirror as well.
Yes.
Where it's not even just, do I have the 2 life to pay? You actually, if you have 2 very good players going at it and this card is in the spread, there's consideration. Can I afford to tap out if it means I have to untap later and Infernal Grasp something my opponent played this turn? The considerations actually get really deep, which is really exciting for me.
Yeah, I think like you said, play patterns are great. Just all around, it's a good card. You could look at this from every different angle, and I think it comes out on top as probably one of the better cards of the entire set for Innistrad Midnight Hunt for Cube, just in general.
Yep.
All right, what do we have next?
Next, we have the list of custom cards for Black, because like you said, that is one of the better cards in the set, but Black not adding quite as powerful offerings from here on. But the first custom card we have is Bloodline Culling. 1 black for an instant. Choose 1. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. Or creature tokens get -2/-2 until end of turn. So it's not quite murder for the 3-mana kill spell. You are limited to things that are still pretty beefy. On turn 3, it should generally kill anything. But then you also have the option to give -2/-2 to all tokens, which is not on the level of Infest, but this is actually really similar to that white sweeper, the 8 mana that costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Where this is a sweeper that's specifically good against token decks. If you're looking for a sweeper that doesn't necessarily punish the decks in your cube that are just curving out with 1-for-1s, if you really want to push back, but still feature stuff like Lingering Souls in your cube or other big token generators, this is a neat tool for that sort of thing. Not on the level of a lot of other sweepers or spot removal spells. The flexibility is nice, so I think it'll be pretty significant in a cube that wants it. It's just that not every cube is going to want it.
I will be honest. I want to be honest with you, and I want to be honest with everyone that's listening to the 540 right now. Until Ryan read the card aloud, I thought this was a sorcery.
It's a lot better as an instant.
Sure, let me tell you, it sure is. I didn't include this on the list, and Ryan added it on there, and I was like, I'll let him talk about it. I'll see if he can talk me into it. And as it turned out, he did by simply reading the type line on the card.
Yeah, I'm most persuasive when I'm reporting facts.
It makes a really big difference. It actually makes a really huge difference for this card. And I think it was like mostly unplayable as a sorcery, just because we've seen like effects like this before. And sorcery speed is just almost always too slow. However, instant speed, especially when you add that second mode on of actually being a sweeper, that's a really big deal. That's a really big deal to just be able to do that at the end of someone's turn after they dump a bunch of tokens onto the battlefield. So yeah, this goes up a couple of notches and definitely would get the custom designation from my book as well.
Yeah, it would probably be falling off the list as a sorcery. I'd be inclined to agree, but as an instant, that can be a pretty brutal swing in a combat.
Yes, definitely. I actually like, I really like cards with this design because I am more or less okay with inexpensive sweeper effects as long as they are only hitting tokens and not real creatures. I think someone getting 3-for-1 on an aggro deck when they went like turn 1 creature, turn 2 creature from their hand and spent 3 cards, playing into like an Anger of the Gods or an Infest is very, very frustrating and is almost like unrecoverable from. But creature tokens, you're usually putting those into play in chunks. So I feel way less bad about it, and the utility that this card offers from the other side, I think, is a lot better.
Yeah, I would really dislike the way this card played if it was able to tag a bunch of non-token creatures. You're just kind of punishing something that struggles enough anyway.
Exactly.
And the way it's set up. This is pretty transparently one of those cards that you probably wouldn't see if they weren't designing with some amount of best of one gameplay in mind. But I will just say, I think that a lot of the cards that are designed for that best of one kind of thing, always useful, that does influence, it tends to lead to some pretty strong and interesting and fun cube cards as well.
Yeah, I think we've, as a cube community, have definitely benefited from Arena Best of One being something that they have kept in mind in the design process. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. All right, so the next custom card that we have is another one of the early cards previewed for Innistrad Midnight Hunt, and that's Champion of the Perished. This is a 1/1 zombie for a single black mana, and it says whenever another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Perished, which is, of course, exactly the text on Champion of the Perish for humans in white. Now, for better or worse, Champion of the Perished, the black zombie, does suffer from there not being a wealth of other zombies that can play quite as aggressively comparatively to the wealth of other humans that can do so for Champion of the Perish. Mm-hmm. That being said, I don't think you need a ton for this to be meaningful, and The good thing about this, it is easier to get zombie tokens than in general it is to get human tokens across all of Magic. So I think that's another benefit in the favor of this card. Ryan, you're going to say?
Yeah, and it's something that happens with White and Champion of the Parish. Is a lot of the creatures you would just naturally want to play with do end up being humans. Not all of them, but more than the black creatures that are zombies. So there's a good clip, but you do have to move away from a lot of your better options. It's a pretty big miss in just a classically powerful cube. First of all, there's the question, are you even supporting an aggressive black deck in a classically powerful cube? And if you are, good chance it's got a sacrifice theme going on. So you have a nice hit with Gravecrawler, but you do have significant misses with cards like Bloodsoaked Champion, Bloodghast, and these cards are so much more powerful than the next more powerful zombie. So there's some considerations going on there. That all said, this is a card that I personally intend to do a lot of cubing with. I am a big fan. It just isn't quite there for the highest power level or the most generic high power levels.
For me, this is one I want to put on the shelf, and then after Innistrad Crimson Vow, want to come back and see what other zombies we got in that set as well.
Yeah, I'm really curious and excited to see how the tribal stuff and really just the whole set shakes out for that one.
Yeah, and I think that it's obviously clear that that's going to have, where there's a lot of werewolves in this set, there's going to be slightly tilted towards vampires in that set. But, of course, we're going to be getting zombies in both. So, you want this in the first set for constructed formats, but that generally means that maybe from a cube perspective, hopefully we can hope that maybe we're getting an influx of slightly more aggressive zombies in the second time around for the group of Innistrad sets that we're getting now. So
it certainly feels like one of those constructed plants, right?
Yeah.
They put it in standard. It's like, watch this one. Technically you could just play these now and like some other mediocre zombies and, do your arena daily quests, but more likely there's a plan for a more competitive standard deck down the line.
I would imagine so. Especially considering that we have 2 Innistrad sets and then we have a Kamigawa set. And for those of you that do not know, one, Kamigawa, the original Kamigawa block, my least favorite block of all time, does not mean I'm going to be not excited for this Kamigawa set because those two things don't have to have a lot to do with each other. However, related to Champion of the Perished, Kamigawa block famously has no zombies in it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And if that continues to hold true, that will be not good for Champion of the Perished and Constructed, and maybe make it a little more difficult to continue to push that zombie aggression angle for us cube players as well. So just something to keep an eye on. That's all.
Yeah. I wouldn't even expect the new skin for Kamigawa to introduce zombies. It doesn't seem like that would be the angle. But
it does not. Cyberpunk zombies in a plane that didn't have zombies already. Yeah, I'm going to guess that we're not going to see them, but either way.
Tell you what we are going to see. We're going to see Curse of Leeches on our classic list here. This is a curse enchant player for 2 and a black. As this permanent transforms into Curse of Leeches, attach it to a player. So either you play it as an aura on that player, or this is a transform card. If you transform back to this side, you can attach it to a player then. That's pretty useful. And then at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, they lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. And it transforms by being daybound. And if we are nightbound, if it's nighttime, it transforms into Leeching Lurker, a 4/4 Leech Horror with lifelink. This card is incredibly cool. My concept of how playable it is just, I just don't have a read on it. I haven't done enough drafts where I even have played most of the rares, and this is one that I really do want to try playing with. I think that it's one of those cards that's way more cool and fun than good, but the idea of playing with it excites me.
Yeah, I am there as well, and I don't think that it is necessarily bad. I think that in lower powered cubes, I actually think this is a pretty reasonable card because as a curse, obviously it's incredibly difficult to interact with being an enchantment. and for a control deck in a lower powered cube, this is going to offer some flexibility in, kind of putting not really a clock on your opponent, because the front part is mainly to keep you alive at a clip of 1 a turn. But then, whenever you can flip it over and you can start, if you get in a hit or two with the backside as a 4/4, can really turn the tide as a control deck. And that is where I think it interests me. And it does specifically have to be in a lower powered cube, because obviously on the front side, just having gain 1, lose 1 once a turn is not going to be nearly enough. But there are definitely cubes that I have played where I think this card would be very cool, and hopefully there will be some people that give it a shot, because I think that it is probably something that can perform decently well if you are keeping the power level on the lower side for whatever cube you have.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely for that sort of environment. But if somebody does include this in their cube, I think it'd be really cool to see this card in a pack. So hopefully, if you try it, it plays well and satisfies you.
Yes. One that's a little more straightforward is Definistrate. This is an instant for 2 and a black. It's quite simple. Destroy target creature without flying. In Pauper and Peasant cubes, Murder is a card that is relatively powerful. Being able to kill a creature with no restrictions obviously comes up quite often, especially when you are limited to just commons. This is doing the same thing with the restriction of not being able to hit flying creatures. Now, that's a pretty big drawback, because flying creatures often will kill people on account of having flying.
Mm-hmm.
But still being able to destroy most creatures and being able to splash this a little bit easier means this is going to find its way into Pauper and Peasant cubes at, I would say, a decent clip. Probably more Pauper cubes than Peasant cubes, but still, this is another largely unconditional removal spell for 3 mana that they have access to.
Yep. On the topic of Pauper cards, next up is Diregraph Horde. 4 and a black for a 3/4 zombie. When Diregraph Horde enters the battlefield, create 2 2/2 zombie creature tokens with Decayed. And then, when you do, exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. This card is bonkers in Midnight Hunt Booster Draft. It's just so good, because you get the 5 mana 3/4, and that body is serviceable. You get the 2 2/2 decay tokens. There's a number of synergies. You can make use of those bodies, or eventually in a lot of games, you do just attack with them. You get your 4 damage. And then that graveyard hate. Just the flashback, which is an element of Midnight Hunt Limited, which is also likely going to be an element of most every Pauper cube. It certainly was a big element of mine. And it's not just flashbacks. There's a lot of stuff in the graveyards. There's the fact that Gravedigger, that the Archaeomancer type effects that return instants or sorceries from your graveyard to your hand. Just a lot of stuff that plays out of the graveyard is just good in those Pauper kind of environments. This card is just really solid for that, especially if you have a sacrifice theme going on as well.
I mean, sure. I don't even think you need it. I know a Grave Titan when I see one. Look, I understand this is a common and the tokens don't stick around, but for 5 mana being able to put 7 power across 3 creatures into play, and then you have a non-irrelevant ability staples on. Look, this card is... I think this card is exceptional. I mean, this is an absolute slam dunk auto include in Pauper cubes. No question about that. Going to make a lot of Peasant cubes too. And I would actually guess that this is going to make a decent amount of less powerful cubes that are not rarity restricted, where something like Grave Titan is way too powerful for that environment. Mm-hmm. Just being able to have all of those abilities put together on one card. Yeah, this is great.
Plenty of reason to put it in your Innistrad plain cube.
Oh yeah, no question. No question about that. This is 3 zombies for Champion of the Perished, okay?
Indeed. 3+1/+1 counters.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot for one card. All right. Next card up. This is a sorcery. I'm 100% sure, because it would definitely change how I feel about this card too. Foul Play. For 1 and a black, we have a sorcery that says destroy target creature with power 2 or less, and then you investigate. Now, I don't generally think cards like SWAT and SWAT-like cards, which are basically destroying small creatures with power 2 or less, are often very good. As we've said before, for most cubes, there's an average higher power than toughness across creatures, which means cards like this, even if they are good or cheap or provide some utility, have struggled to find a home. But investigating is pretty solid. So this might be worth a look. I would probably go and check how many creatures this can hit before I would add it into your cube. And that's going to be largely along the lines of how playable it's going to be. Obviously, this is going to be for lower powered cubes as well, but this is a removal spell that does provide another game object when you cast it. So I have no doubt maybe you are in a artifact-centric cube and black kind of struggles to add artifacts to the board, and this is a way they can do that.
Yep. Yeah, I agree on all points there. There's any cube where there's a high volume of little creatures, especially if some of your power level is focused around small role players that really drive synergies. Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Llanowar Elves, Goblin Welder. There's just a lot of meaningful cards you can hit with a card like this, and also just totally fine against any aggressive deck.
Yeah, they'll always be a target for that.
Mm-hmm. And our next card is Giza, Glorious Resurrector. 2 black for a 4/4 legendary human wizard. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. At the beginning of your upkeep, put all creatures exiled with Giza onto the battlefield under your control. They gain Decayed. So pretty similar to, how do you say, Kalitas, however you want to pronounce it. That was always a contentious thing in coverage. And I hated all of them. But anyway, it's like that card, the 3/4 lifelinking zombie that exiled dead things and gave you 2/2 zombies. But
it's a vampire. It's a vampire warrior.
That's the one.
Yes.
And it's the fact if you're playing a control game and you kind of want your control decks to try to have to stick their own big threats and take over games that way, this is a really powerful ability to untap with, especially if you're trying to push back a little against a lot of sticky creatures. It can be troublesome getting the balance exactly right between a deck with a sacrifice and recursion theme and a controlling deck. I find that exiling removal is really useful, and if the balance is off in favor of those sacrifice decks, this is a nice hammer to try out and see if maybe that can even things out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think this is, and I'm going to say it. I first of all, I say Kalitas, just because people are going to be wondering. I won't make Ryan pick a side. I am on the Kalitas side.
Before it came up in tournaments, I was on Team Kalitas, but I would say it like really exaggerated, like Kalitas.
Kalitas.
Yeah,
yes.
And then just whoever I was working with or somebody on the weekend said Kalitas, and I think it's most important for a booth to pronounce things the same way, not necessarily be right. And that's the thing about language. It's most important that people know what you mean, not that you are technically correct about everything. Anyway.
So Kalitas, that's a really powerful card. And that is a card that has made it into a lot of cubes and has existed there since its release in Oath of the Gatewatch. Giza is 1 power bigger for the same casting cost. It doesn't just turn opponents' creatures into 2/2 zombies, but it actually turns them into whatever they are. Now, they do have Decayed, but getting the creatures that died in most cases is going to be more powerful than getting the zombies. However, it's the delay. The delay is problematic. And I also think that the lack of lifelink is strangely problematic for this card as well, because it's more important, because you're not getting creatures that are able to block. Because Decayed says not only are they sacrificing, but they're not able to block. So it's a little hairy for Giza to tangle in combat, because you want her to stick around because of the ability. That's the reason that you're playing the card. You're not just playing a 4/4 for 4 that if an opponent's creatures would die, you exile it instead. And it's not a super unreasonable card, but that card is generally not going to make any cubes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're left with this really weird creature that's sizable enough to get into combat, and it probably will when it's super safe to do so. But otherwise, it has an effect that is more akin to an enchantment, and you want to try to take advantage of that when you can. I don't know where I feel about Giza.
My belief would be that there's a longer window if the game progresses, the comparison being controlling Leeches or controlling Giza. I think there's a longer window where a player can control Giza, even get a couple of the tokens, and the game can still be competitive. And I think that's a huge point in the favor of a fun cube experience. But this is the reason the card is custom, whereas Leeches is going to teeter closer to classic play patterns.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah, there is certainly more tension, and that is, a thing. And we haven't talked a lot about the Decayed mechanic as it's coming up in more and more cards. The Decayed mechanic with those zombies does create a lot of tension in gameplay, especially on pushing aggression, and I think that's mainly a good thing. Mm-hmm. Just not only for regular limited or Magic in general, but specifically for Cube 2. So this is providing something that is unique in terms of that, because I don't know if this is the only thing that gives things that aren't just 2/2 zombie tokens decayed, but it might be, and off the top of my head I can't think of anything else. I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah, I think it is.
So I don't know. I like Giza. This is a card I would need to see play, and maybe I'm not giving enough credit to the fact that it is a 4/4, because that's still a meaningful percentage of someone's starting life total. So maybe Giza gets to tangle in combat a bit more often than I'm anticipating. All right. The next card that we have is another flip card, and that's Graveyard Trespasser. So Graveyard Trespasser is a 3/3 human werewolf for 2 into black. And it has Ward 1. Or excuse me, Ward, not 1. Ward, discard a card. Which is actually better than Ward 1 in most cases. So Ward, discard a card. So whenever someone has to target it, they must discard a card, or that ability is countered if it is an opponent. Whenever Graveyard Trespasser enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a line. So this is off of an enter the battlefield. It's also off an attack. It's also difficult to interact with because it has Ward, discard a card. It's also a werewolf, so it has Daybound. And on the Nightbound side, it turns into Graveyard Glutton. Still has Ward, discard a card, it turns into just a werewolf, and it is now a 4/4 with the ability, when Graveyard Glutton enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 2 target cards from a graveyard. For each creature card exiled this way, each opponent loses 1, you gain 1. A lot going on with this card, and actually one of the better playable black graveyard hate cards that, in my opinion, that we have seen in a little bit of time.
Yeah. And I don't think this has come up on the podcast before, but this is actually the sort of card that I think if you want to have some graveyard hate in a graveyard-centric cube, this execution is exactly where I would look. Getting a little bit of hate, and then that hate that can snowball. This is a solid threat on its own as well. It's insulated from removal a little bit, but the important thing is just getting that small amount of graveyard hate that can compound over time, which forces some action, some tension in the game that way, but doesn't just KO your opponent. For example, Scavenging Ooze, miserable in a graveyard cube. Don't do that to people. But getting this kind of slow burn graveyard hate actually incentivizes players to be more proactive in terms of executing their game plan quickly and or reactive, actually caring what the opponent does, not just going full dredge mode, actually needing to have some way to answer a card like this.
I completely agree. And because I really, the ability is relevant. It comes in off of ETB and attack. So it's not like you're not able to get more than one card, which is the reason the Scavenging Ooze is so miserable, as you stated, is because you play it on turn 6. You're like, I could maybe I can exile 4 things, and that might just KO someone that's also interested in messing with the graveyard. This can do that over time, and can certainly do that very fast on the Nightbound side if you're able to do that. But there's still a lot of tension. But it goes along with having to push the aggression again, which I think is always positive in most cube environments, is attacking with creatures. And the ward is just icing on the cake. Having to discard a card feeds in, of course, to the second ability, because it's going to put more cards into their graveyard for you to exile. And that's more in formats where you have multiple one of these, but it's still like the design of this card and how that works together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big fan of that card.
Yep, very cool.
Next up, we have Jaren Corrupted Bishop. 2 and a black for a 2/3 legendary human cleric. This guy parties. Whenever Jaren Corrupted Bishop enters the battlefield or another non-token human you control dies, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 white human creature token. For 2 generic mana, target human you control gains lifelink until end of turn. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you have exactly 13 life, you may pay 4 black. If you do, you transform Jaren into Ormondal, the Corruptor, a 6/6 legendary demon with flying, trample, lifelink, and sacrifice another creature, draw a card. So as a baseline, you get some stuff that is just good in a human deck. You get 2 human bodies. You get some ability to turn any human that dies or any human you might sacrifice for some other value into fresh human tokens. You can also give some of your humans lifelink to try to gain some life that way. And I feel like it's actually really difficult and probably almost never happens that you actually transform Jaren. And I think that actually makes the card really cool.
I completely agree.
I think that might probably comes up like every 20 drafts you'll transform it once.
Yeah. Mostly flavor text. Often on this show we talk about creating cool moments in Cube Draft. This is going to be pretty high on the list. When you're in a game situation, you have the ability to actually flip Jaren into Ormondal. It's going to be a great moment for you and everyone that's at the table during that draft.
Yeah, definitely. And it's 6 mana at your end step. Even though the card has some abilities to lose life, the ability to gain life involves getting into combat and also spending 2 mana. So if you're trying to gain life up to 13, that's going to be 8 mana on your own turn. Maybe you have a sacrifice outlet and you can push yourself down to 13, but you do need to keep your 2/3 around through that. I imagine it happens pretty rarely and is very cool for that reason. Yeah,
I think for the most part, as far as me evaluating this card, I'm ignoring that bottom line.
Yes.
And I'm only kind of thinking about the second line of target human you control gains lifelink. However, if you are supporting human tribal in your cube, giving a 6/6 champion of the parish lifelink is a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. So that's something that definitely comes up. This is in my opinion, probably the second best black human card if you're doing human tribal, probably beside Zekrid Nathomancer, just because it turns those into 2/2s rather than 1/1s. Although this does turn a human into a human, so maybe there's a case for that, for this being better as well.
Yeah.
Either way,
those are 2 of the best. Certainly, my cheaty answer is the best is Dark Confidant.
Yeah, you mean the best black human?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That you're not wrong. Either way, this comes with a token on its own, right? Not too bad, just from the basis of that. And I don't know. I think that the cost on this card is low enough. Like, it's 3 and it already comes with another thing, that it's kind of like, I like they put the 3rd point of toughness on here because it's like incidental if it happens. But this is a creature I would feel okay about attacking with. You put another body onto the battlefield when you cast it too. That was also a human. So if you get like 1 extra trigger off of this card, I think it's pretty solid. And if you don't, then it's probably below average, but not embarrassingly so.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's got enough upside to be interesting. So this is a card that I would definitely try, especially if you're doing like a sacrifice theme or a human theme. I think there's a lot of flexibility of different kinds of cubes that Jaren could go in.
For sure.
Okay, next card up. This is not a transform card. This is Morbid Opportunist. Speaking of things that go into sacrifice-oriented cubes or strategies, Morbid Opportunist is a human rogue that is a 1/3 for 2 and a black. And it says when 1 or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now, we know that I hate that line. Things triggering only once a turn. That's not very good. However, the thing that does save this from being a little, it makes it a little better. Whenever 1 or more other creatures die, they don't have to be your creatures. Okay, they could be your opponent's creatures. This is a card that is definitely going to be, it's an uncommon, first of all. So it's going to be probably restricted to either very low power cubes or cubes that are rarity restricted. But that being said, a 1/3 for 3 that basically adds draw a card onto all of your removal spells and lets you essentially draw a card in every single combat, I think is probably better than it looks. Have you had the opportunity to play this card in actual Midnight Hunt Limited yet?
No, but it's certainly one of the cards that I would pick fairly highly, especially just synergizing with the decay mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like, it's often going to be true for a peasant cube and for a number of non-rarity restricted lower power cubes that the 1/3 body actually discourages a lot of attacks.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Just some
tough
1/1s rolling around.
Yeah, tough to get past in combat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So, just, anything that is offering repeated card advantage, I feel like is always worth a look.
Yep.
So, that's kind of where I sit on this one.
Yeah, I agree there. And our next card is No Way Out. A sorcery for 2 and a black. Target opponent discards 2 cards. You create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. So Mind Rot with a little upside. We tend to see something like this pretty regularly these days for limited. And this is the sort of thing that I think is mostly going to show up in rarity restricted cubes that are trying to more closely emulate limited. But having that 2/2 there, if you're getting up to some kind of sacrifice theme, or it's just kind of fine in a beatdown deck, the kind of scrappy deck that hopes that the Mind Rot takes your opponent's cards that are better than yours out of their hand, or their ability to cast their expensive rares or what have you.
Look, I like me a Mind Rot. I'm going to be honest. Okay, I played Mind Rot frequently in limited, basically at every chance I get. I would say this is probably the best Mind Rot for cube. Now, is that good enough? I don't know. It might not be. But I do think that for a cube environment, this would be the best one. Creating a 2/2 creature, even if it's one with Decayed, is generally going to be more meaningful than being able to cycle it. Generally going to be more meaningful than making them lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. Generally going to be more meaningful than, I can't even think of other effects that have been stapled onto this in the past.
My pick would be the cycling one.
Unburden, it costs 1 black.
Is it? Or wait, no. The one from Ikoria is Coercion, not Mind Rot, isn't it? Yeah, that card would be really good if it's cycled for 1. Yeah, Unburden's whatever. Actually, I'd probably go with even it's 4 mana, so it's not exactly Mind Rot, but I do like the Adventure one from Throne of Eldraine.
Yes. The one that turns into the 4/5.
Yeah, 7 mana 4/5 flyer.
Yeah.
That's arguably better than a 2/2 decay zombie, but you do pay for it.
You do pay for it. Yeah, you do pay for it. Yeah, it costs 4 mana. It draws you a card that's a 4/5 for 7. I don't know. I am very curious. This is actually one that I would love to hear people's opinion on. I think this is the best one. I don't know if this is is a Mind Rot good? If Mind Rot isn't good in your cube, this card's not going to be the thing that's I've finally been waiting for a Mind Rot to get printed. And oh my gosh, No Way Out finally has made it into my cube. Now, if you're playing a really low powered tribal cube, this is Make a Zombie. That's not irrelevant. But I'm definitely interested to hear what people think of what the Mind Rot cube scale is and where this would land on it.
Yeah.
All right, this is a card that I'm actually very high on. And I probably more so than Ryan, so I'm glad I get to read it. This is Siege Zombie. This is a 2/2 zombie for 1 and a black. And it has the text, tap 3 untapped creatures you control. Each opponent loses 1 life. Notably, they can be summoning sick. You can use Siege Zombie to do this ability. This is similar to, Hermit Druid and Crypt Breaker, where you can simply tap 3 things that meet the requirement. The requirement for this is it just has to be an untapped creature. I think this card is pretty great. Being able to have a 2/2 for 2, which is, a not embarrassing thing. I think, generally a baseline for a 2-cost creature to be successful in most situations is has 2 power, so check. And this is an ability that can absolutely take over a game in a stall board situation, or if you are just playing a bunch of tokens. If you're able to put more than 1 creature into play with a single card, I think Siege Zombie starts to get out of control really, really quickly, but in a good way, because obviously you can just remove it or remove the other creatures. So I'm a big fan of Siege Zombie. Now, I haven't played the limited format, but I expect this card to be very good in that format too. So I will just say that will probably positively affect my decision even more strongly than I am right now.
It's a Splinter Twin combo with Diregraph Horde.
Unbelievable. Just right there, boom, 3 creatures.
Yeah, that's one of the better things to get up to in Midnight Hunt Limited, actually. And I do like this card quite a bit. 3 creatures is a lot for an actual cube draft. Being in the market for a 2-mana 2/2 in your black deck is kind of a big ask. That's why this is going to lean custom, though. I can definitely see this being a competitive element of solid decks in some cubes. It just doesn't quite make it to mainstream success.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue this should be in Classic. I think ultimately this is a custom card. This is one of the higher cards on my scale for all the black cards we have in this set, as far as flexibility and power level among a large variety of cubes.
Yeah, in particular, if you have kind of a heavier token theme, or for some other reason, your cube leads to a lot of creatures staring at each other and attacks being difficult to come by, this is a solid way to break a board stall.
And it breaks it pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And our next card, if you like Diregraph Horde, maybe I could interest you in the Mythic Rare version. We have Tainted Adversary, 1 and a black for a 2/3 zombie with Death Touch. When Tainted Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 and a black any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Tainted Adversary, then create twice that many 2/2 black zombie tokens with Decayed. So for 2 mana, 2/3 Death Touch. For 5 mana, 3/4 Death Touch, 2 2/2 Decay zombies. For 8 mana, 4/5 Death Touch, 4 2/2 Decayed zombies. And this is, by a pretty significant margin, the worst of the Mythic Rare adversary cycle.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty agreeable. You know, I will note Death Touch better than pretty much everyone gives it credit for in Cube. I think it comes up actually pretty frequently.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I wouldn't play this card on face value as a 2/3 for 2 with Death Touch.
Yeah, I think that you're generally looking for this if you explicitly support the zombie tribal. And maybe if you don't, but you have a slot you're looking to fill in for a sacrifice theme, it could play decently there. For the most part, though, I think a zombie you can cast on 2 for 1 and a black is the big draw here. And then if you're able to make those decay tokens, put those to work with the Crypt Breaker, that's what you're really looking for with a card like this.
Yeah, I think this is better than Diregraph Horde, but as a reminder, that is literally a common, and we shouldn't be having to make that comparison to a Mythic Rare.
Yeah, when I first had that thought, yeah, it started with actually drafting and just being really impressed by Diregraph Horde and just thinking, yeah, that Mythic Rare card is not really better.
Yeah, I mean it is better. It is better. It gives you the flexibility.
Doesn't offer any graveyard hate whatsoever.
It does not. So it's not. It is not better 100% of the time. No doubt about that. But either way, the fact that we're like, yes, that was a really nice custom card that's going to fit into a bunch of cubes, and this is almost the same card, but it's a Mythic Rare. Hard to justify this for anything but custom.
Yeah.
Okay. We have finally come to the card that I'm most interested in talking about. Not because I necessarily like it the most, but I think it's one of the most interesting, maybe the most interesting black card. And that's the Meathook Massacre. 1 A+ name. No way around that.
Destroy all slivers.
See, I made the same joke. And honestly, Ryan, I don't think people remember or knew. I guess everyone that knows does remember. But slivers used to be called meat hooks because their little sliver faces look like sharp hooks. So that's like back, 10, 15 years ago, like Meat Hook Tribal was just Sliver Tribal. So a little tidbit for people out there.
You're welcome to the listeners.
Yeah. You'll do nothing with that information. The people that didn't know that are annoyed that we said it. And the people that did know it are like, well, of course, everyone knows that.
That's a tidbit for nobody.
Yeah. So the Meathook Massacre is a legendary enchantment. And its casting cost is X black. When the Meathook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. And of course, it's an enchantment, so it also has the text, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. This is one of the most creative twists on the Blood Artist type effect. Blood Artist, Zulaport, Cutthroat, Bash of Remembrance, etc. Because you can simply cast it for black as the enchantment. You could ignore the front part where it's a sweeper. And largely have the same thing. Whenever a creature you control dies, they lose a life. You don't get both when your creatures die, but it provides something on each side, so I think it's roughly equivalent. But the thing that really interests me is I actually think that when I initially was evaluating this card, that I focused too much on those last 2 abilities, and I ignored this card's viability as a sweeper, and I think that was a mistake.
Yeah, you can just put this in a control deck.
Yeah, I think quite easily you can put this in a control deck. I don't think it was that long ago when a card like Black Sun Zenith was like I don't want to say it was a cube staple, but it was a very widely played cube card.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is better than Black Sun Zenith. It provides significantly more utility across a number of archetypes. And even though you're not getting the effect more than once, it's something that sticks around that is going to have an impact on the rest of the game. Even if you're in a control deck, this doesn't limit it to non-tokens. So a lot of times control deck makes tokens, usually with Planeswalkers, more for being defensive. So if you're also there, you're able to sweep a bunch of creatures away. If you do this X = 3, this is just going to be like a black Fumigate in most cases. So I actually have turned around on this card, and even though I do think it's custom, because I don't really think the fact that it's a mythic rare, so it can't make most rarity restricted cubes, and that this is probably just not powerful enough for the highest power level cubes, keeps it from being classic. But I think this is one of my favorite cards, just from a theoretical design standpoint, because I think it's so interesting, and I really am excited to try this one out because I'm not 100% sure how it will play.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about this card. It is a little inefficient for classic cube settings, and I actually think that the perfect home, at least of cubes I'm aware of, is, I think you could call it the custom cube. That was the Magic Online Nega cube we saw a few months back, where it wasn't allowed to play any of the cards in the Magic Online Vintage Modern Legacy cubes. And the reason I like this card for that environment, it's actually really similar to a card I've been thinking about a lot today in this booster draft format, Thermo Alchemist. And that might sound weird, but I'm getting there, I promise. So Thermo Alchemist is really cool in this set because it's a nice bridge between the Bloodthirst decks and the Spells Matter stacks. Just on turn 2, the Spell Matter stacks, you can untap it, get a bunch of damage with it. It's right at home there, it blocks for them. The Bloodthirst decks, obviously, it's a funnel to getting direct damage and turning on your Bloodthirst mechanics. And so the Meathook Massacre, in much the same way, goes in the blue-black tap-out control decks for the Nega Cube, or is a nice payoff for the Sacrifice, the black-red decks. And I really like cards like that take a monocolor slot and support 2 multicolor archetypes.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think that the flexibility of this card is deceiving, because it's really easy to kind of get focused on one of the sides. But I think both are very relevant. Both are very relevant both times, because you're going to get something else out of it, whether you're looking for the enchantment, creature's dying side, or the sweeper side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that life gain is going to be a big deal for the control decks.
Yeah, very much so. And honestly, like a thing that sometimes happens with the like sacrifice decks is maybe you make a bunch of like small creatures like 1/1s, and you get into a situation where you can't meaningfully attack because they'll just take 1 and you won't be able to make a trigger, and then they attack you back with a much larger creature. Well, this is a situation on like turn 6 is just like, all right, X equals 4, I'm just going to kill everything, and now I have like 12 triggers where you're going to lose 12 life and I'm going to gain a bunch of life. If you have like a Zulaport Cutthroat or a Blood Artist or something else out, where you're basically like doubling up on those creatures dying triggers. And that's a way to like do your thing and also clean up the board against decks that might match up a little bit better than they normally would. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting card. I'm looking forward to trying it, and I'll try to report back on my findings.
Cool. Yeah, I do think it's a very cool card, so I hope it works out for you.
Yeah, me as well. Okay, it looks like that is our last black card that we have listed. Ryan, is there anything else you want to touch on with black?
There's a number of other cards that are interesting. Nothing that's really putting anything over. So we touched on the most compelling ones. The set is pretty deep. I mentioned when we talked about booster draft at the top of the show. I like how deep the packs are. Wouldn't be surprised if a number of listeners had a few other black cards that they were interested in. But we have finite time and interest here.
Yes. So on to red. So we're going to take one more ad break, and when we come back, Innistrad Midnight Hunt, the red cards.
What's up, gamers? Taking a break from the pod here to talk to you about Star City Games Premium. Now, I know many of you are already Premium members. That's awesome. You're awesome. Thank you for that. If you are not already enrolled in SCG Premium, we need to talk. You are leaving a value on the table for $7.99 a month. you get access to 5% off of Magic Sealed product, 10% off of all Magic singles, 15% off of supplies. Now, I know that I am talking to a lot of Cube owners here. I know that you're going to buy more sleeves. You know you are going to save this money right back on sleeves alone. So that's reason enough for you to enroll. But I am not done yet, not by a long shot. You also get tons of exclusive content from a fantastic stable of writers. We're talking about Jerry Thompson, Paulo Vitor Rosa, Patrick Sullivan, Autumn Burchett, Brad Nelson, Sheldon Memory, Ross Merriam, Todd Anderson, Shaheen Sarani, Michael Majors, Ryan Sachs, Ari Lax, Dominic Harvey, Cedric Phillips. The list goes on and on. My stuff, you can get that every week for free. You're welcome. But now I am asking a favor. Go ahead, get enrolled for SCG Premium. Go to starcitygames.com/join-premium. Sign up today. And let's get back to the podcast. Listen up, gamers. I have some huge news. If you haven't heard, the SCG Tour Online is back, and we're giving away cash prizes, tens of thousands of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena Qualifier Weekend invitations, MTG Arena Championship invitations, and the big one, Star City Games Invitational invitations. You heard that right. The Invitational is back. And that's going to be at SCG-Con. SCG-Con is back, taking place Halloween weekend. That's October 29th through the 31st in the Star City. That's Roanoke, Virginia. And you can qualify for the Star City Games Invitational via the SCG Tour Online. Stay tuned for more details on that. Those will be coming soon. And for more information on the SCG Tour Online, head over to scgtouronline.starcitygames.com. Now back to the pod.
All right, Innistrad Midnight Hunt red cards for Cube. I'll let Ryan start off with this one, both because I know he's a fan of the first card we're going to talk about, as well as I got to talk at length about the Meat Hook Massacre. So Ryan, take it away.
Yeah, red, of course, my favorite color, and this one of my favorite cards from the set. Our first classic card for red is Bloodthirsty Adversary. 1 in a red, a 2/2 vampire with haste, and this is part of our Mythic Adversary cycle. When Bloodthirsty Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 in a red any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Bloodthirsty Adversary, then exile up to that many target instant and sorcery cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast any number of the copies without paying their mana cost. So, 2 mana, 2/2 haste. That's just a card that you're going to play in a lot of your red aggressive decks in Cube. And then when you get that first payment of 2 in a red, you have a 5 mana 3/3 haste that you get to essentially flash back a mana value 3 or less instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, which is very similar to Goblin Dark Dwellers, except you don't have to put Goblin Dark Dwellers in your deck or your cube.
That's the best kind of Goblin Dark Dwellers.
The big selling point for me. Yeah. Apologies to fans of Goblin Dark Dwellers, and actually a favorite of mine, Goblin Dark Dwellers combo, which is Seething Song, out my Goblin Dark Dwellers, cast the Seething Song and some other 5 mana spell. But you can do that with Bloodthirsty Adversary. So the combo is preserved. It just takes on a different form.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know of a red aggressive deck that's like, I don't want this 2/2 for 2 haste creature that scales well. If you know of one, maybe you're simply more adept at tricking your opponents in Cube Draft to not draft any red cards, so that card just doesn't make the cut in your deck.
I don't think that you're going to draft a deck where this ends up on the sideline. I could see passing it for a 1 mana creature or a 1 mana burn spell, maybe for a utility land. Like, those things are all arguably of higher value, but this card's not ever going to sit on the bench in your deck. You're going to make this card every time.
I can't imagine it will. And this is the reason this is classic is, I mean, this scales incredibly well. Any cube where the where you have cards in your graveyard,
a cube where you have an opponent with life points.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do you start at 20 life All right. Do you have instants and sorceries in your cube? Yes. Do you like casting them more than once because they're the cards you drafted and put in your deck? Okay. Do you like doing that and have your creature be bigger and still have haste? I mean, it's literally everything that it does. This card can also just, I mean, if you have the opportunity, or you're maybe forced into a scenario where the game's gone long and you do this for 8 mana, you're probably going to break the game wide open. Break the game wide open, I mean you're probably going to be able to kill 2 of your opponent's creatures and then attack them to be able to win.
If you are casting it for 8, I hope it is winning by casting those 2 spells in very short order, because your deck's probably not super well set up to play games where players have access to that much mana.
Yeah, I would imagine not. But either way, you know what? Even like the good thing is when you get to that point, the reason I like this one so much is you get your mana's worth pretty much every time. Even if you don't flashback something that costs 3, even if it's less mana, I think it's still pretty reasonable to have the body come along with it.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, I'm you know, I don't think there's really many downsides to this card.
Yeah, and I do really advocate. I mean, if you have something else that you're interested in cutting, I do tend to keep a list of cards that I'm ready to remove from my cubes, but I just generally recommend the swap with Goblin Dark Dwellers if you don't have anything else in mind and you do have that card in your cube, because you can just play Bloodthirsty Adversary in a controlling or a mid-range deck, and it'll do much the same thing. And that haste body, either to attack planeswalkers or just that 2/2 body to block early, it'll perform better than Dark Dwellers on average in those decks as well.
Yeah. Menace is a much worse keyword than haste, to the point where I would happily have a smaller haste creature than a larger creature with menace.
Yeah, that will often be the case.
Yeah. All right. We have more classic cards for red than we do black. So our second classic card is Falcon Wrath Pitfighter. This is a simple country 2/1 for a single red as a vampire warrior, but it has a little bonus text on it. Long gone are the days where red has to have a 2/1 for 1 and you have to give away your firstborn child or take 10 damage or skip your next draw step or have your opponent take control of it. Who knows? Now you get actual upside with your red creatures. Even if it's minor, we still have to count that as a win. So the text on Falcon Wrath Pitfighter is you may pay a generic and a red, discard a card, sacrifice a vampire, which is in a lot of cases going to be this vampire, but sacrifice a vampire. Draw 2 cards, activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. So later in the game, if you ping someone for 1, again, notably, this does not have to be on your turn. Only if an opponent lost life this turn, you can cash this in by discarding a card and sacrificing it for 2 new cards, which I think is just swell, because there's so often that 1 mana red creatures are bad later in the game, and this one still going to be not great, but it has an ability that makes it not terrible.
You will use this ability sometimes.
Yes. And let me tell you, that is a huge upgrade from where we were previously.
Yeah, it is just getting the 1 mana 2/1. We've had actually quite a number of good red 1-drops come out lately. So there's actually not necessarily room for every 1 mana 2/1 that you want to put in a cube or that you could put in a cube. But this one's going to show up in some classically powerful cubes, and it'll make sense. That's just a fine thing to open the game with.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, look, again, not everything can be Monastery Swiftspear. There's not going to be just cards that are going to be mostly great at every point in the game when you're talking about red 1-drops. While this doesn't have haste, it does have 2 power, 1 red mana relevant later in the game. Sign me up. That's a classic card.
For sure. All right, our next card is a little bit deceptive. But I think it's quite the heater. This is Light Up the Night. It's a sorcery for X and red. Light Up the Night deals X damage to any target. It deals X plus 1 damage instead if the target is a creature or a planeswalker. So if you target a creature, you spend 1 mana, so your opponent opens on Llanowar Elves, you play a mountain, cast Light Up the Night, you can deal 1 damage to the Llanowar Elves on the draw on turn 1. So massive upgrade over a lot of these red X spells we've seen there. And then it also has flashback, 3 in a red, remove X loyalty counters from among planeswalkers you control. If you cast this spell this way, X can't be 0. So you can, for 4 mana, come up with another Blaze effect that requires a little bit of help. I mean, planeswalkers tend to be classically powerful cards, so I imagine that'll come up sometimes. The big thing is going to be that this is actually just X damage for X mana. You can kill a 1 mana creature on turn 1. It also scales a little bit more efficiently if you're tapping out to use your Blaze effect here to take down a planeswalker or a larger creature. And then when it's come time to end the game, you can still just go upstairs. It is just a standard Blaze that way. You do have to pay the red. It doesn't give you that free damage, but it still does close the game. And that's a big deal for me, because we see so much stuff that can only hit a creature or a planeswalker. And I just want to go upstairs. That's who I am. It's what I want to do. I like the red aggressive decks, and this is a card that this actually is probably going to be more for mid-range and controlling decks, but it'll show up meaningfully in more mid-range, aggressively slanted mid-range decks and be able to close games there, which is also something I do like quite a lot in Cube.
Yeah, the flashback really pushes it to the more mid-range controlling decks, but even on its face, even if you're like, I can very rarely flash this back, that little bonus effect where you get the extra damage if you're hitting a creature or planeswalker means that it's absolutely playable in aggressive decks, because you're not wasting your mana to do it as a removal spell. And when you're going upstairs to someone's face, then it's just Banefire. It can still be countered, but you know that is, in my opinion, the generally most cubable X red spell that we've had in a long time. And you know that is something that red decks don't always have the ability to play, because it's incredibly inflexible when you have to point it at a creature or a planeswalker. Having to pay that extra 1 red mana, not having to pay that extra 1 red mana to get the extra damage for this is a massive, massive deal. And the fact that this has flashback is really like what pushes it up to me in a classic power level. Because if you're playing a control deck, you can get you can get someone down and then just pay 4 mana. You don't even have to spend your whole turn to tap out, and basically just sacrifice any amount of your planeswalkers, spend all of their loyalty, and just blaze someone in the face right for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this card is really, really great. I actually think this is probably going to be one of the most slept on cards for Cube in this set.
Yeah, and I imagine that it looks so familiar. Like I've seen a Blaze before, but
yeah,
it just functions so differently and so relevantly differently. Just tagging the 1 toughness creatures on turn 1 is just massive for an effect like this.
It is absolutely massive. Even, I mean, honestly, it scales incredibly well. I mean, if I had to spend 3 mana at sorcery speed to kill a 3 toughness creature on turn 3, and I'm playing a control deck, I'd just happily do that.
Yeah, deal.
You know, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, this I think this card is awesome. Yeah, just that 1 little extra damage just makes all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next up, we have this may be the only dragon in the set. Maybe there's another one. I think this is the only one, actually.
Innistrad is known for the occasional dragon.
No, there's 2 dragons. There's a purifying dragon. But that's an uncommon. This is a mythic rare. We got Moonvale Regent. This is a 4/4 dragon for 3 in a red, and it has flying as they do. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each card of that spell's colors. And then when Moonvale Dragon dies, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. Now, for the most part, I kind of consider that bottom bit to be a little flavor texty. It's going to deal, I would say, 1 or 2 most often when it dies. But the fact that you can just cast spells and loot as well definitely makes this an interesting choice for your 4-mana slot.
I think when you talk about the best 4-mana red cards of all time, I'm not thinking of an example that doesn't cost 2 red. I mean, some old heads might say Flametongue Kavu, but Flametongue Kavu is well past its prime. I'm thinking of
careful.
I'm thinking of PN Kieran Nalaar, Hell Rider, Koth of the Hammer, Chandra Torture Defiance, I think is generally the consensus best one. This is going to be a little bit easier to cast. And I think that this is generally going to be crowded out unless you're playing like a 540 card cube. But certainly if we're just talking about the regular arena cube, not the fancy ones, not the Tinkerer's cube, not the chromatic cube, but just the arena cube that's just cards that are good on rate. This is going to show up there and be pretty dang good in the red decks. And there's not really a theme that's necessarily going to push you towards this card. This is really just for cubes where you would want an experimental frenzy kind of effect, but you want a little bit more agency. And the 4-mana 4/4 flyer is generally going to offer more as a baseline than playing with Frenzy is going to. And that one shows up sometimes. We've seen it in and out of some of the Magic Online cube offerings. And I think that this is a pretty serious upgrade for that sort of slot.
I don't know. I'm on the other side of Classic on this. I think personally that this is a custom card. I do think that it's powerful, and I absolutely agree with all of your points. That being said, I don't think Experimental Frenzy is a Classic card either.
Yeah, I don't think any totally of the cards. Fair.
I don't think any of the cards this is replacing are Classic cards, and I don't think this is a huge enough replacement to those to upgrade it into being widespread cube appeal. That being said, if you have a lot of multicolored cards in your cube, I think this is a really great card, because discarding a card and drawing 2 cards, or discarding your hand, which is often going to be like discarding a single card and drawing 2, that's a pretty big deal. And if it's anything more than that, which in most cubes it's not going to be, but if you have 3 color cards, like I said, if you're really pushing that multicolored theme, drawing 3 cards is a gigantic, absolute, crushingly massive deal. Now, this card is in this set. I guess for everybody else that maybe is not as worried about cube or the like, this card is in this set because Streets of New Capenna is going to be coming out in Q2 of next year, and I'm sure that this card is going to be significantly more relevant and standard when you're casting 3 colored cards frequently. And when we get those, when we go to another multicolored centric set, this is definitely going to be one to look back on if that set hits for cube in a more meaningful way across the multicolored spectrum.
I think that if you want to do something cool and synergistic with this card, you're actually going to be a victim of its stats being too good. Like, I'm not, like, we've already had the conversation, named a number of other red 4-mana cards that are better, but 4-mana 4/4 flyer, especially a splashable one like this, just 1 red pip, you're not going to have time to do fancy stuff. You just win too quickly, right? Like, this card actually just has the stats to cross the finish line very effectively. So I think that it is too good at closing the game to do anything terribly flashy with it, which is an argument that it doesn't quite fit custom because it's too classically powerful. But I do buy the argument that it's not classically powerful enough to just show up in too many classically powerful cubes. So it's just kind of this tweener card.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, on rate, it's great. I mean, we just don't see 4/4 for 4s with flying mostly ever. And the fact that you can put this in just about any deck at the cost of 1 red mana is very good. But but where does this fit?
If you're really excited about a theme and you see somebody cast it, you know that thing where you're cubing and you have a card and you have a theme or an execution in mind and you're excited to see what people did. You're like, oh, what happened? And there's some really cool answers where like, I had it with this and I had a really cool engine, these synergies. Kind of the worst case scenario is like, oh, that card didn't make my deck, or I didn't think it was very good. And then another kind of deflating one is just like if you're waiting for some story and they're like, I attacked them for 4 or 5 times. Like,
yeah. I don't know. It's just maybe I'm wrong. I actually hope that I'm wrong because I think this card is really cool. I think it's a very, very cool card. But yeah, it doesn't quite get there for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Is it my turn? I think it's my turn.
It's your turn.
Nice. We have Reckless Stormseeker. This is going to be our last classic card for red. It's a human werewolf, so it has two sides. On the front, we have 2 in a red, 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. And this is day-bound, so if it's neither day nor night when it enters, it becomes day. And then when it's night-bound, we have a 3/4 werewolf with at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample and haste until end of turn. So just that 1 red pip, 3 mana, 3/3 haste, because you just target itself with the +1/+0. That's kind of a base stat that we've talked about in a couple other cards when we've done these set reviews. The Hulking Bugbear was the 3/3 from Adventures in Forgotten Realms, and that one costs double red. And this one, you just get a little bit more splashable, and then you can give the haste to other creatures. So if your 4 mana play doesn't have haste, or next turn you're going to play one of your cheaper creatures that don't have haste and a removal spell, you give them haste with your Stormseeker. And then if it becomes night, granting not only haste, but then also trample, that's just huge for red decks to get the last couple points of damage across. It's often the case. It's certainly in higher power level cubes where you just need to figure out a way to get 2 or 3 extra damage. And you have to do it quickly because your opponent's going to be doing something powerful and locking the game out some way, somehow. And just 2 extra power, that's haste if you're playing a fresh creature, trample, whether it's just modifying something you already had or the fresh creature giving that haste and trample, you're going to find those last points with a card like this. So I really like this for red aggressive decks in Cube.
Yeah, okay, so in the last 2 sets, in the last set that came out before this, which was Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, we had talked very warmly about Valor Singer, which is a 2/3 for 3 with just the ability of target creature at the beginning of combat on your turn. Target creature gets +1/+0. It doesn't get haste. Okay, for lower powered cubes, obviously doesn't quite do enough for higher powered cubes. Mm-hmm. The set directly before that, we talked about Battle Plan, which is a red enchantment for 4, which has basic land cycling, but also when it's on the battlefield, it says beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 to a turn. Also doesn't give haste, but we were like, yeah, this card is great, much better than the other ones in its cycle. We finally got to the one where it's giving the extra keyword, and notably, and this is something that does not appear on every single card that is a transformed card with this set, but the backside is just a better version of the already good front side. And that's really, really important here because the reason you're doing this is because it's pumping its power, it's giving it haste. On the backside, it's giving it an extra power and trample. This card is not situationally good. It's good pretty much at all times, with the absolute floor being that it's a 3/3 for 3 with haste.
Mm-hmm. And it just changes the range of cards your opponent has to be concerned about, right?
To all of them.
When you're playing against a red deck and your life total, you're getting in a precarious situation, you start thinking, okay, well, I would like to spend as much of my mana as possible. If I tap out at sorcery speed, I need to be worried about these burn spells, these creatures with haste. I saw this in the draft. But then it's just any creature if you have the Stormseekers. Yeah. Everything has haste. So now it's just, if they have a creature, this is a serious problem for me.
Yeah, this card is awesome. If you somehow you get to flip it, this card is really, really good. Like really, really good to where it becomes like a kill on sight card. Although it probably is on the front side too, so I don't think maybe that's not much of a big difference.
I wouldn't let that one hang around.
Yeah. But if you're giving something +2/+0 trample and haste, even if it's itself, I mean, geez, that's that's a recipe for ending a game in very short order. But again, this is the front side and back side for this card. You don't have to care which one it's on. It's better for it to be on the back just because it's bigger and stronger, but the front side is just as good, and that is exactly what makes a classic card. No matter the scenario you're playing this card, and it's going to perform the same, and that sameness is the exact thing that you want to do in a lot of aggressive decks and mid-range decks. I think this is notably very, very good in a mid-range deck as well, because then you can actually scale your creatures to being large creatures, and granting large creatures haste that should not have it is really, really, really meaningful.
A combo with Elder Gargaroth.
Yes. Yeah. Once you started casting those like 4 and 5 mana creatures and giving them haste, that ends the game in quite short order. Imagine playing like a Titan and giving it haste.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like there's this card's sweet, super duper sweet. Definitely easy classic for me. Okay, so that is the last one though. That's the last classic card that we have for red, and now we move into our custom section. And I do quite like this card. This is an effect we've seen before. This is Ardent Elementalist. This is a 2/1 human shaman for 3 and a red. When Ardent Elementalist enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, previously, when we've seen this, it was in blue, and it was named Archaeomancer. Now we have the red version. The power and toughness is a little bit worse, but it is slightly easier to cast. Either way, if you are interested in having this type of effect, usually red and blue equally like doing the returning instants and sorceries or the spellslinger stuff. So I imagine if Archaeomancer is good enough and you're extending that ability into red in your cube, that this is a card you will probably also like.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm a big fan of those decks, certainly in Pauper Cube. And I do get into trouble sometimes with the double pips and Archaeomancer. Yeah, because you're trying to cast it off of bounce lands and maybe some other tap lands. So that extra splash ability, these tend to be 3-color, just good spells, and sometimes you even go into 4, 5 colors. So I do think that costing a single red is very significant.
Yeah, I think that's very notable too. I'm a big fan of Izzet Chronarch. Mm-hmm. You know, that was way before Archaeomancer, and certainly way before Ardent Elementalist. So I'm glad more of these type cards exist.
For sure. Next up is Burn Down the House. 3 red for a sorcery. Choose 1. Burn Down the House deals 5 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or create 3 1/1 red devil creature tokens with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. They gain haste until end of turn. So you have that devilish ability if you are ahead, and attempt to catch up if you're behind. If this card came out 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I mean, definitely 10 years ago. If it came out 5 years ago, probably this would just be like a red card in every cube.
10 years ago, well, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a little bit too easy to just untap and haymaker your way out of this these days. But even still, this can be really significant to have. Definitely if you're going for more of a limited power level, like this will be really nice to have around in your Innistrad plane theme cube, that sort of thing. Very good rare in booster draft, as you can imagine. It is in classically powerful cubes. Just the red mid-range and controlling decks, they're not winning because they have the best sweepers, and this isn't one of the best sweeper. Even though it can clean up planeswalkers, you're going to have kind of a worse time setting up again than a lot of your opponents are. And so it just doesn't really clean up everything that you want it to. It's pretty nice, especially if you are a sacrifice theme. It's just not lights out.
Yeah. I like that they put the second part on, because I think if you just have 5 damage each creature and each planeswalker, I mean, you know, Storm's Wrath costs 4, it does 4. That's largely this, largely the same thing, -1 on each end, but certainly losing a casting cost is more relevant than losing a damage in that case. But having the opportunity to have the second effect on there makes the card not dead, but you would absolutely, unequivocally, under no circumstance, would not play the card if that's what the card was for 5 mana, put 3 devils into play.
Right.
So this is, Ryan, I'm going to steal one of your phrases. To me, this seems like it's on the end of 2 bad deals. and it's going to be situationally good, and I absolutely understand that. And I think both sides can be situationally good. However, they're going to be good in times that you absolutely need them to be. Well, I need to draw this because this is the card I have to get me out of this situation, not this is the card I want to get me out of this situation. Like, this is the card I had to draft in the cube to fulfill this effect that my deck needed. But should it have been in the cube in the first place? I'm going to argue in most cases that's going to be no, because there's already things that do both of the things better. And even though it does have the flexibility, you are absolutely, in this case, paying for that flexibility with mana. And because of that, I just don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, the sweet spot is if sometimes the 5 damage can be a way to line up a Blur's kill, but that's not even necessarily worth a slot there for as cool as it is abstractly. So I agree. It's going to be in some cubes, but
yeah,
you're
looking at really low power. It's not unplayable. It's not unplayable because the effects they do still do something. Like, it's not like this card doesn't have like meaningful text on it, because both of the sides are
you'll play
are going to impact the
legacy
board.
cube games, even vintage cube games where this card would swing them. It's just that that's probably not the kind of deck or card that you wanted to draft.
Yes. Yeah. And when you like reverse engineer that, it's like, how does this make it into cube over whatever card I'm cutting for it? And that's the part that I'm going to have trouble getting over the hill for.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. The next one is a lot less so for me. I actually think this card's quite good and is probably going to make a huge amount of cubes. And this is Cathartic Pyre. This is an instant for 1 and a red. And it also has choose 1, much like Burn Down the House. However, these are 2 abilities that I think you see more frequently in cubes. Choose 1. Cathartic Pyre deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. The second ability is discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. I think for all but the highest power level cubes, this is probably going to make its way in as something that deals with creatures and planeswalkers and has a little bonus Faithless Looting effect if you draw it later in the game or you find that you have no targets. And I know Ryan doesn't like Is It Charm, and we got a little Is It Charmness going on with this card, so I know that's going to come up and I want to head it off at the pass. Again, this is 1 color, not 2, and that makes a big difference to me.
Make it target players, cowards. So I understand. So the reason that you don't see these cards with the ability to target players when you have creature or planeswalker and then also some additional effect or modality is because if that card ends up being good, that really homogenizes gameplay. So I'm sympathetic to that. That much makes sense to me. They just really miss on me for cube because they can't target players, though. So it is one of those things where you are protecting constructed formats because you just couldn't print this card where it can hit players. But only being able to do 3 damage to a planeswalker, like that's very medium. And you are right, like you have the other modes. This isn't just Is It Charm. It's a monocolor card. I would play this in a lot of my red arena cube decks, and there's a pretty good chance it shows up into that cube. But I'm not like picking it over the one that Scorching Dragonfire one, like the one that exiles. Like I care more about the exiling when it comes to a card like this. And I would like to see an Incinerate that had some different upside or a mode that could actually hit players for a cube, because I don't think that Searing Spear and Incinerate and just all the 2 mana 3 damage cards are compelling for a cube anymore. And just having one that was by far the best is something that I think would be worth a slot and would not put anything over. I think it'd be totally fine for a cube. The problem is these cards are very damaging for constructed if you do it that way.
Yeah, well, definitely damaging for constructed. Absolutely. I think Incinerate is a fine cube card, and I guess I don't feel like it's necessary to just overwhelmingly blow Incinerate out of the water with allowing this card to
I do. We gotta send strong messages. All the other colors are doing it.
Well, Are they?
Most of the other colors. Blue and green are doing it.
Yeah, blue and green are doing it. That's true. Yeah, you're not wrong about that. Okay, either way, I think as the cards... I was trying to sit here and decide if I agreed with this sentiment or not. I don't disagree with it, but I guess it just seems like a slippery slope. Like an unnecessary slippery slope.
Oh, yeah, it's wholly unnecessary, to be clear.
Yeah.
And I have demonstrated the reason that it is a harmful direction for the game. Don't print the cards that I want you to print. Don't do that. It would be bad for everybody but me. But I would like it.
Okay, well, fair enough. Yeah, Cathartic Prior, pretty good in its own right, would be better with Ryan's version.
All right, next up, we have Electric Revelation, a 2 and a red instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. Draw 2 cards. Flashback, 3 and a red. Really reminiscent of a card from original Innistrad, Desperate Ravings. And that one had a random discard tacked on. This one you have a little bit more control over, but it is mono red, and you pay a little bit more for the effect. But, I mean, it's not the most powerful form of card advantage, but it's a flashback spell. Gives you some card filtering. If you care about cards in graveyards, if you care about madness, if you're trying to have some kind of churn card filtering, card drawing effects without just making them overwhelming card advantage kind of effects, this seems really nice for a rarity restricted or a lower power cubed.
The flashback on this really pushes it over the edge for me. Because I think that is a super meaningful. Well, obviously, given the context of this card with what Ryan said, like we've had this effect before, but this is pretty meaningful. And Desperate Ravings again is 2 different colors. It's not just in mono red, and I think that this is you're right in the same wheelhouse of Desperate Ravings, even though Desperate Ravings is 2 and a. It cost...
It's 1 in a red, then 2 in a blue,
2 in a blue. Yeah, okay. So it's costing 1 more on each side, but still an instant and in a single color. Mm-hmm. So, I think if you're... I'll put it this way. If you're a lower-powered graveyard-centric cube, I imagine this makes it in.
Yeah, I think that this is a card that I would really want to see in a cube that's trying to be evocative of Innistrad Booster Draft. This goes into every Ominous Roost Burning Vengeance deck.
There you go. Perfect. And I think there's actually a lot of cubes that are like, I want red to be a part of some graveyard theme in some way. And if you're not dealing with the most powerful cards in Magic, this is probably one that ticks the boxes enough to where it is a meaningful role player the decks are looking for in the draft. All right, so the next one up, we have Festival Crasher. This is an effect that we have seen before, but still a good one, especially great when you have multiples. This is a devil that is a 1/3 for 1 in a red. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Festival Crasher gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So, not quite Kiln Fiend, but it does have an extra toughness, and it's still doing a lot of the same thing. If you want to have aggressive spell slinging type stuff in red, you want as many of those as you can possibly get to be able to have a redundancy in the draft. And this is another one that absolutely fits the bill for being playable or for being aggressive enough to be playable in your cube.
Yeah, it doesn't hit as hard as Kiln Fiend, but I actually think there's a lot of situations where you would rather have Festival Crasher. I have tried Kiln Fiend across cubes and constructed formats, probably more than most people. And actually the worst thing that can happen is your opponent just plays blockers. Like that. You cannot just attack into stuff with Kiln Fiend. Everything trades with it. And that extra point of toughness, I think, is going to be more valuable, certainly if your cube is just more creature-centric, which a lot of lower-powered and rarity-restricted cubes tend to be. You'll be able to make cheekier attacks and just attack more often with Festival Crasher, which I like quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. Also, a lot more things deal 2 damage than 3 damage.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like both cards. I think both cards are relevant. If you have one, you're going to want this one.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, I
pretty simple.
definitely think you would put both in.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is not a replacement scenario. This is a more is better scenario.
Right. All right, next up, we have Flame Channeler. 1 in a red for a 2/2 human wizard. When a spell you control deals damage to anything, transform a Flame Channeler. And you get Embodiment of Flame on the backside, a 3/3 elemental wizard. Whenever a spell you control deals damage, put a flame counter on Embodiment of Flame. And for 1 mana, and removing a flame counter from Embodiment of Flame, you exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So this is another card to add to cards that combine well with Flame Jab. If you've been keeping track of those at home, I know I have been. And just in general, it's not a huge ask for a red deck to transform Flame Channeler. Just a spell deals damage.
Yeah.
Won't always be around, so this is not necessarily classically powerful. I think just 2 mana, 2/2 haste is going to do what this card does a little bit better. You know, you just care about attacking. But if you want to do some cool things with spells matters, I think specifically games are going a little bit longer. If you are looking for synergies with Flame Jab, there's some really cool stuff you can do here. Can churn out some extra cards, and you don't have huge swingy effects that close games very quickly. Being able to turn your burn spells into extra cards is quite valuable.
I really like a very simple thing about this card. 1, incredibly easy to flip. 2, doesn't flip back, just a 3/3 now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just on its face, like if you are a very a burn centric red section in your cube, this feels like a slam dunk because it's just going to turn into a 3/3 immediately, and then it actually has a relevant ability on the backside. Even if you just do it 1 time and get it to a 3/3 on a regular basis, and like do that other ability 1 time or 0 times, I think you're looking at a very impactful card.
Yeah.
Really just a 3/3 for 2, I would play this.
Red does not get many Watch Wolves.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and this is castable with a single mana, and it has upside beyond this. So, yeah, I think this is probably one that that probably plays. Maybe it plays better than I'm thinking it does in a wider variety of cubes, but I definitely think that in lower power level, or again, if you're like very burn centric, if you have a lot of those burn spells, then this is going to be an absolute slam dunk for your red section.
Yeah, I think that the reason that I would put it in custom pretty confidently is if you're just casting those spells upstairs and using these flame counters to get extra cards, there's a lot of effects that are pretty similar to that. And just either executing some kind of controlling game plan, executing some kind of combo, or just committing more seriously to the battlefield, that stuff is all more powerful and faster than lava spiking your opponent a few times.
Yeah.
Like all of those strategies are going to clown on you if you try to do that in a high power environment. So
yeah, repeatable damage via creatures, especially when the even though it's a delay because they don't have the haste that a lava spike does. Unless you're literally closing the game out that turn, they're going to be more meaningful in a variety of ways.
Yeah. So I think that the card is quite nice, but not for every cube.
Yeah, definitely. All right. The next card, this is, I'm going to read this and then I'm going to let Ryan take the wheels. This is Obsessive Astronomer. This is a 2/2 human wizard for 1 in a red. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Obsessive Astronomer enters the battlefield. When day becomes night or night becomes day, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Now, We talked last week about other cards that had this ability. I didn't know that when you played it, you didn't get to do the ability immediately, and I was corrected and then removed some cards from my list. Yet, you are a believer in Obsessive Astronomer.
Well, far be it from me to disparage any card with the text of Is It Charm. But no, seriously, the fact that you just have the 2-mana 2/2 that's hanging out, I think that this is really going to be serviceable for lower power and rarity restricted cubes, because it'll happen from time to time. You just have a couple extra lands, which means you can't cast a spell. So you pass, you just get to rummage that, and it costs no mana. So whether you're leaving up a removal spell, a counter spell, or where you can really see this card shine if you're supporting some kind of madness theme, this is the kind of card that I think could perform quite well in that Innistrad plane kind of cube. It's not an overwhelming amount of power, but if you're playing a game where some number of creatures tend to stick around, nobody's really taking over with huge effects, you get a bunch of small swings, really just getting to rummage the one time if a 2/2 body is of consequence in your cube is pretty meaningful. And if you're discarding for value, that certainly puts the card over.
You got to be in... Okay, so basically, I think at the end of this, there's going to be a subsection of cards that it's like, is it worth it to put Night and Day in your cube? And I will absolutely say, if the answer is yes for you, and you're like, I want to try to do this mechanic, Obsessive Astronomer is an auto-include because the ability is incredibly powerful. Being able to have a free Faithless Looting whenever that happens, the cost of no mana, getting alongside a 2/2, I mean, that's great. It's the first part that I think is a massive, massive hoop that you have to jump into and really figure out a meaningful amount of space in your cube before you start looking at a card like Obsessive Astronomer.
You pointed to trying to facilitate day versus night. I think that some of that does just happen naturally, whether it be just by having some number of instants or you run out of gas. But for me, the big thing is just it being a cube or a 2-mana 2/2 isn't embarrassing on its face.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Next card up. This is a fun one. Seize the Storm. This is a sorcery for 4 and a red. Get a red elemental creature token with trample, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard, plus the number of instants, plus the number of cards with flashback you own in exile. So, one, I love the wording at the very end of this. You don't get punished for flashing back cards with exile, and in fact, you actually get a bonus for it. And two, this is similar to the card from, I think it's the last core set. That was the
blue-red
card
one
that made the weird.
Yeah, what was that? I don't remember what it was called.
Yeah,
I think it started with an E. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what it was. Anyway, that made a token equal to that, and then you got to return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. Well, this is similar to that. It's in one color, but instead of returning one, it just lets you flash this card back later.
Might have been Galvanic something.
I just don't remember. I know people are screaming at us as they listen to this. Either way, I really like that card in that format, and I think for lowered powered cubes that are doing the Spellslinger thing, that was a very fine and playable card.
Yep.
And this is right alongside it. Again, you don't get to return anything, but the fact you get flashback and it counts everything you have with flashback in exile means that you're going to get a bigger creature than normal because, again, Spellslinger decks really love those flashback cards, so this doesn't punish you for playing them.
I am displeased that it only counts instants and sorceries in exile with flashback. We already have the Crackling Drake technology. We know we can just count them. We're just making sure this card isn't too good with Treasure Cruise. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
I guess it makes it more at home. Like it says the punchline, like, hey, put this with your spells with flashback, like, let me draft that for you. But this is another hot one for your Burning Vengeance strategy, and it's just going to come up, I think, in a good number of peasant cubes otherwise.
Yeah, I like it. Pretty clear where this is going to go. If you're interested in this and you already have this theme, this is just an extra build around card.
Yep. Right, next we have Smoldering Egg. 1 in red for a 0/4 Dragon Egg with Defender. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a number of Ember counters on Smoldering Egg equal to the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Then, if Smoldering Egg has 7 or more Ember counters on it, remove them and transform Smoldering Egg into Ashmouth Dragon, a 4/4 flyer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Ashmouth Dragon deals 2 damage to any target. So early on, decent blocker. But then I think that this card really shines if the spell suite in your cube, you're trying to support stuff like Flashback. I think Think Twice is kind of the big card I'm looking for. Like if Think Twice is a reasonable thing to get up to in your cube, I think there's a real argument for Smoldering Egg alongside that, or Una's Grace. That's one that you mentioned recently. It's a nice little combination.
Yeah, it's just really any of the stuff that you can like repeatedly cast. Even the card that we talked about a little bit earlier with the Electric Revelation. Again, that's 7 mana right there, as you had noted.
Yeah.
So, this is a card that I think is better than it looks. I have not played with it, so I'm not comfortable of saying that it's significantly better than it looks. But I do know that when you get to the backside, that is a huge, very real threat that can end the game quick. Because if you're in the spell slinging or the spell casting deck where you're trying to get this, and you have spells left over, especially because the front side says, please cast large, expensive spells to flip this fast. And the back side says, cast as many cheap spells as you can. I really like the tension it creates between these two cards. And 2 damage to any target is really sweet, because you can act as you can play defense with this card, you can play heavy offense with this card. And the front side allows you, being an 0/4 defender, allows you to work up your spell stuff in a way that a lot of the other red and blue spell slinging cards generally don't do. They're often extremely aggressive pushing, and I like that this card can play defense really well too.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the backside is powerful, and the notes are certainly there. This is for some type of spells matter strategy, though we don't evaluate planeswalkers by their ultimates. If you're doing that, you're a mark. You've been tricked. You got to figure out what you're doing the turn you cast them, and a couple turns after, before you can get up to the big effect. And I do think that you specifically want to be looking for some reliable access to some expensive instants and sorceries. So both it being reasonable to cast that sort of thing, and then having some support for that. So again, I am specifically looking for the card Think Twice, maybe Forbidden Alchemy, mystical teachings, just kind of a theme that is not just about casting spells, but actually having some spells with those mana costs of 3 and 4. So in 2 spells you can transform this, but then they're also cheap enough that you can get some triggers.
Yeah. That's a good note. I'm trying to think if there's anything that's like highly cubable that you can just curve directly into, like, play this on 2, then play something for 3, then play something for 4.
I mean, like, if you want to go into just all-time powerful cards, turn 3, Prismari Command or Electrolyze into Cryptic Command.
Yeah. Jeez, yeah, you're gonna win that game for sure.
Oh, yeah.
If you do that sequence.
That game is over. You might even just like bounce their land and draw a card on your turn, so you can attack them for 4.
You're like, look, I'm gonna by the end of your turn, I'm gonna be casting the Cryptic Command. So, yeah. This would be in play. It just transforms it. Oh no, shit! As soon as I have the opportunity, I'm just going to bounce something. I'm going to bounce something and draw a card and then turn this into the dragon.
Oh, yeah. Let's get busy.
Yeah, let's get busy. Yeah. I think this card is sweet. This is another one that I really want to try to be able to push that spell slingy stuff a little bit more in my personal cube. So this is one I'll also report back on. And the last card that we have for custom is another spell slinging oriented card that cares about instants and sorceries, and this is Spell Rune Painter. This is a great name, by the way, Spell Rune Painter. I'm a big fan of that name.
Oh, yeah.
This is a 2/3 human shaman werewolf for 2 and a red. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, Spell Rune Painter gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And this is, of course, day-bound. It's a werewolf. And on the night-bound side, it is simply a werewolf called Spell Rune Howler. It's a 3/4 with the ability whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Spell Rune Howler gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If you're missing out on the rare stuff because you have a rarity restricted cube, or you are maybe foregoing the tokens stuff that often come along with the spell slingery thing, such as Young Pyromancer and maybe Poppet Stitcher from last week, and you're really just saying, I want to be able to cast spells to push the aggression as much as I possibly can, Spell Rune Painter is the card that's right up your alley, because on both sides you're just getting a creature that is similar to the little Festival Crasher that we were talking about earlier, but obviously significantly more resilient in the fact that it gets +1/+1 rather than just a pump to its power.
Yeah, pumping the toughness and then also having the 3/4 on the backside. You pay a little more, but you get a little more.
Yeah, it's nothing fancy, but this is definitely a cubable card, because you have to say, I assume that when you have this, you're going to be casting at least one instant and sorcery, so you're going to be getting a potentially a 3/4 that can scale bigger the more that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a fun lower power card. I mean, I of course love prowess as a mechanic, so I'm of course going to enjoy the experience of casting spells to make creatures large. This is going to be a little less efficient, a little lower power level version of that, but I'm all for that in cubes across all shapes, sizes, and power levels.
Agreed. Ryan, that was our last red card that we had listed. Is there anything else you want to add for red?
Yeah, again, there's a few other cards that are of some interest, but you'll be aware of them. Sunstreak Phoenix is kind of a neat one if you really want to lean into day and night, but much like other red 4-mana cards we've talked about recently, certainly gets crowded out on power level, and you'll have a pretty good idea that you want the cards we haven't discussed here. And we did discuss quite a few cards as well. Red, I like the red additions to Cube in this set quite a lot.
Yeah, I really like the extra little push for the instants and sorcery matters or spell slinging stuff, specifically that we got from red. We got a little bit from blue last week, but I like the red editions as a group more, and I think that that was a meaningful inclusion for making that strategy more relevant across a larger number of cubes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, specifically really excited for just some of those minor upgrade things. Light up the night. Really love that design.
Yeah.
And maybe someday I'll get my better Incinerate.
Until then, you can subscribe to the 540 anywhere you're listening to this podcast right now, as well as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, your local podcast application. Please leave us a review wherever you are able, whether that be a star review, a little text review, give us a little wink and a nod, in whatever way that you possibly can. The algorithm loves it. It's a very hungry beast. If you want to find more of my stuff, you can follow me at jparnell1 on Twitter. The Think Twice podcast is my other non-cube specific podcast where I talk about magic and pop culture every single week, and you can find that anywhere you can find the 540, as well as Commander versus the Commander show live gameplay that I host, and that is on StarCityGames.com and YouTube. Ryan, what you got?
You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Overdrive, as well as my articles weekly on StarCityGames.com. Going to go back to being secretive. You have to click to find out. You have to go to the website but I think you will be satisfied if you do. I got some pretty cool stuff coming up, and I think a nice new cube project dropping this week. It'll depend. I am a bit reliant on the digital cube offerings, so I don't know when one's coming up. So when they do the Magic Online Spotlight cubes or any of the regular offerings, I am on top of that to break those down. And then sometimes I get to write about my own stuff too. So I think I have something that's one of mine up this week, but you will have to go to StarCityGames.com to find out.
All right, and I will. That's it for this week. 2 down, 1 to go. So we've gone through white, blue, black, and red. That means that next week we have green and everything else left for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. You don't have to tell me what they are, but do you have any cards you're specifically looking for next week?
I'm really stoked about some. I already have my top 10 cube cards from Midnight Hunt article over on SCG. I'm a big fan of Augur of Autumn. You'll probably hear that one near the top of next week's show.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I'm going to keep that one in mind. All right. That is it. Thank you all very, very much for listening. We'll catch you next time.